I hope that you are well and that you had an amazing day today. All right, so before we start with our lessons or with our classes, you're going to log on to the A plus students.ca. All right, so once you've logged into A plus students.ca with your username as well as your password, we're going to scroll down up until okay. Then once you have logged in with your username as well as your password, you're going to select language arts. That is the subject that we are focusing on, just language arts, and then we go to grade 5. All right, so once we have chosen language arts grade 5, the chapter that we will be focusing on today is adjectives and adverbs. So, adjectives and adverbs. So we are focusing on the chapter of adjectives and adverbs, and the lessons for today is choose between adjectives and adverbs, and is the word an adjective or an adverb. All right, so we're going into our first lesson. Okay, so an adjective, it is a word that tells us about a noun. Adjectives often tell us what kind or it tells us how many, right? And remember, it tells us about the noun, or we can say it describes a noun, right? And like I say, that it often tells us like what kind or how many, right? And if we look at the example that we have over here, the apples were delicious, right? So apples being the noun, right? And now we need to basically say what kind of apples, right? So we can then identify it as being delicious apples, right? So this adjective, it tells us what kind of apples they were. They were delicious apples, right? So that is an adjective that tells us about the noun. Then we have adverbs, right? Because we are comparing adjectives and adverbs, or not even necessarily comparing, but we are talking about adjectives as well as adverbs today. So, an adverb, on the other hand, it is a word that tells us about the verb, an adjective, or another adverb. So, if you were to compare, then you can say that an adjective, right? It basically tells us about a noun, right? And remember, nouns, it names people, places, things, or ideas. And an adverb, it is a word that tells us about the verb, right? So specifically the verb, but also an adjective as well as another adverb, right? And a verb, it is a doing word, right? It's an action. All right. So adverbs, it often tells us how, when, or it even tells us where, right? For example, Grace ran really quickly. Grace ran really quickly, right? So the adverb within the sentence, right, is quickly, right? So it is quickly. And the adverb um really, sorry, go back. So firstly, Grace ran really quickly, right? And we will then identify the adverb, sorry, as really, because now they want to know how, really quickly, sorry. So now they want to know the adverb really, it tells us how quickly Grace ran, right? So quickly, quickly. Okay, so most adverbs, right, it tells us how, or most adverbs that tell us how, because remember we said an adverb, it tells us how, when, or where, right? So most adverbs that tell us how, it usually ends in ly. For example, quickly, hurriedly, or so on, right? But it ends in ly. So as much as most adverbs, right, that tells us how end in ly, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the adverbs end in ly. Because if we look at the example over here, right, she arrives soon, right? Soon is an adverb, but it does not end in ly, right? The soon basically just tells us when she will arrive. She'll arrive soon, right? And then also with something ending in ly, right? Not only does adverbs end in ly, but also adjectives. In this case, in the sentence, we have Fred has a friendly dog, right? So friendly, it tells us about the dog, right? And friendly ends in ly. So it tells us what kind of dog it is. It is a friendly dog. All right. Do you follow? We go on to this page in front of us, right? Once again, we see an adjective is a word that tells us about the noun and it tells us what kind and it tells us how many, right? We're going to go to the examples now. And then we also have an adverb. So before we go to the adverb, the examples of adjectives, right? So we're going to do the examples first together. So examples are I live in a beautiful house. Beautiful house, right? So if we were to identify the adjective within the sentence, then the first one is beautiful, right? So what kind of house? A beautiful house. She wore a red dress, right? So what kind of dress did she have on or wear? She wore a red dress, right? Linda's hair is gorgeous, right? Her hair is gorgeous, right? So we need to basically describe or tell about Linda's hair, right? And we said Linda's hair is gorgeous, right? It tells us about how Linda's hair is, right? It is gorgeous. Remember, we're doing adjective, right? That tells us about the noun. Jack is an angry man. So, what kind of man is Jack? We can then say that Jack is an angry man, right? He's angry. The yellow Ferrari is standing next to my door, right? What kind of Ferrari? So, here we need to identify the color, which is yellow Ferrari. All right, so that is just a few examples of adjectives. And we said adjectives, it is a word that tells us about the noun and it often tells us what kind or it tells us how many, right? All right, so now if we go to an adverb, if we go to an adverb, we said adverbs. An adverb is a word that tells us about the verb, right? Or it tells us about an adjective or it tells us about another adverb. And adverbs, it tells us how, when, or where, right? And the examples that we have in front of us, right? These five examples, we are going to identify the adverbs within these sentences. Tortoise walked slowly, very slowly. So tortoise walked very slowly, right? So we basically need to say how he walked, right? So he walked slowly, right? The car crashed severely, right? So the car crashed severely. So that is basically just us asking how badly it crashed, right? It was severely. And remember, we also said that adjectives that ends in ly, the adjectives that tell us how, it often ends in ly. He is speaking very gently, right? So how is he speaking, right? Gently, right? So gently is our adverb. The presentation is almost completed, right? So when will the presentation be over? We can then say it is almost completed. I sometimes read a book, right? I sometimes read a book. So when do you read a book? We can then say sometimes I read a book, right? And those are adverbs that we have identified within the sentences, right? And we made examples and identified the adjectives within those examples. All right. If we go back to the tutorial page, right? The first one is the woman decorated her house beautifully yet inexpensively. We need to identify the specific word that basically either describes the woman, right? So is it the thrifty woman or the thriftly woman? So we need to choose between these two words, right? One is an adverb and one is an adjective, right? And we need to basically describe the woman, right? Which is a noun. So is it the thrifty woman or the thriftily woman? All right, so we're going to say the thrifty woman, right? Meaning that she likes to shop at thrift stores or shops, likes to decorate her place in a more olden day yet very nice thrifty furniture, right? Thriftily, right, will basically tell us about the verb. All right. The audience continued cheering as the performers left the stage. So the audience continued cheering as the what performers left the stage. Is it the remarkable or remarkably? Or the remarkably performers left the stage. We need to basically, it tells us about the performers. All right, so we're going to say the remarkable performance. Oopsie. Remarkable performance, right? Because remarkable is an adjective, right? And remarkably is an adverb. Right. When Beth saw Ronnie's puzzled expression, she what teased him about it? Is it she gentle teased him or gently teased him? So we need to choose between gentle or gently, right? One is an adjective that describes or tells us about the noun, and the other one is an adverb that tells us about the verb, adjective, as well as another adverb, right? So gentle, it is an adjective. Gently is an adverb. Teased, teased. So do we say gentle teased or gently teased? So we are going to choose gently, right? Which is an adverb. All right. So teased, right? The way or gently teased, right? It tells us about how Ronnie was teased or Ronnie's expression. All right, so we're going to the test on choosing between adjectives as well as adverbs within the sentence. Choose the correct word that fits in the sentence. So we need to choose one of these words to correctly fit within our sentence. Mr. Osborne merely suggested or mere suggested that you should proofread your emails before sending them. So is it Mr. Osborne merely suggested or mere suggested? All right, so we are going to choose merely, and merely is correct, right? Merely is an adverb, right? Merely is an adverb, so well done. When Beth saw Ronnie's puzzled expression, she gently teased him about it or gentle teased him about it. We need to choose either gently or gentle. Gently being an adverb, gentle being an adjective, right? All right, so we're going to choose gently. So if you have gently, then well done. Tax increases will be discussed in a meeting open to the public. So is it to the general public or to the generally public? General public or generally public? So tax increases will be discussed in a meeting open to the general public or generally public. All right, so we're going to say the general public, right? Because that is an adjective, right? So if you say general, then well done, well done. The speaker answered the question reasonably, and the audience nodded in agreement, or the speaker answered the question reasonable, and the audience nodded in agreement. So we need to choose the correct answer, either being reasonably or reasonable. Option one or option two, reasonably or reasonable. The word that fits within the sentence. All right, someone says reasonable. Right, okay, so reasonable is It's an adjective, right? It's an adjective. And what happens usually with when we have the test questions, right? The test questions can be very tricky at times, right? Because they are putting different answers and sometimes the answers might look the same, right? However, if you do get something incorrect, don't worry, right? They will firstly also tell you how you need to do it. Or what you can do is you can then find the correct answer, right? And then you send it to us. And once you get the correct answer, send it to us, and then we will give you 100 bonus points. So our correct answer is reasonable. All right, so we're now going back to our next lesson, right? So that was a lesson on choosing between an adjective as well as an adverb. The next lesson is the word an adjective or an adverb? And we said an adjective is a word that tells us about the noun, and it often either tells us what kind or it tells us how many, right? And an adverb, it is a word that tells us about the verb, adjective, or another adverb. And adverbs, it often tells us how, when, or where, right? So adverbs, it often tells us how, when, or it even tells us where. And most adverbs that tells us how, it ends in ly, right? It ends in ly. So now we need to identify, or we need to say, is the word an adjective or an adverb, right? So they will give us a word in bold, and then we need to say if it is an adverb or if it's an adjective. Please lock the door securely when you depart. So securely, is that an adjective or an adverb? Securely. All right, so we can then say that securely is an adverb, right? It is an adverb. So they are telling us we need to lock the door, right? How must we lock the door? Securely. So that is an adverb. So even here it tells us the word securely tells us about the verb lock, right? And that is an adverb. The delicious turkey was plump and juicy. The delicious turkey was plump and juicy. The word plump, we need to say if it is an adverb or an adjective. All right, so plump, we're going to say it is an adjective, right? And it tells us about an adjective. Tells us about how delicious the turkey is. It is nice and plump, and that turkey is juicy. Tells us it is a plump and juicy turkey. The biology student examined the feathers closely. We need to say if the word closely is an adverb or if it is an adjective. Closely. All right, so we're going to say that closely is an adverb, right? And it tells us about the verb examined. So it's an adverb and it tells us about the word examined, the verb examined, right? So that is but a few sentences where we were able to identify, or words where we were able to identify the adjective as well as an adverb. And before we go to the test, let us quickly go and do an activity on adjectives as well as adverbs. Okay, so adjectives, right? In this one activity, we need to underline and circle the adjectives in each sentence, right? So you either underline or you can circle the adjective in each of the sentences. The large tree was cut down. So the large tree was cut down. All right. So the word that we are going to, or the adjective within the sentence that we're going to identify is large, right? So large tells us about what kind of tree it is. A large tree. And this large tree was cut down, right? So not the small tree, but the large tree. 5 cute kittens ran across the carpet. 5 cute kittens ran across the carpet. We can either say five or we can say cute, right? Because five either tells us how many kittens or cute tells us what kind of kittens, right? So 5 cute kittens ran across the carpet. He wore his new shoes at school. He wore his new shoes at school. And new, it tells us what kind of shoes he wore. Not the old shoes, not the school shoes, not his gym shoes. He wore his new shoes at school, right? Going to do one more. The birds flew in the blue sky. All right, blue, right? Blue tells us about the sky. Could have said the gray sky, but specifically we are saying the blue sky. She likes to eat sweet food, right? So sweet, not bitter, but sweet food. And there was yummy cake at the party, right? What kind of cake? There was yummy cake at the party. And Mary had blue eyes, right? What kind of eyes did Mary had or have? She had blue eyes. And these are all adjectives that we just identified or underlined within each of the sentence. And it tells us about the noun. And some of these adjectives that we underlined, it either tells us what kind or it tells us how many, like in this case, 5 kittens, right? Or there we have both, either 5 kittens or cute kittens that tells us what kind or how many. All right, so that was adjectives. Now with adverbs, right? We need to circle the adverbs. Complete the sentences by using the adverbs from the word bank, right? And in the word bank, we have early, mouse, always, carefully, soon, helicopter, quietly, eventually, bear, which is an animal, near, skillfully, salmon, bus, privately, as well as normally, right? So we need to choose one of the correct words, one of the adverbs within the word bank, and then we need to complete the sentence. So the first one will stand for us. So Melanie carefully took the eggs out of the fridge. So carefully, right? How did she take it out? She was being careful, carefully took the eggs out of the fridge. All right, the second one is Andrew and Lenny. We need to choose is did they early always painted the fence, soon painted the fence, quietly, eventually, near, skillfully salmon bass privately or normally. So they painted the fence. So can we either say skillfully or eventually they painted the fence, right? Mona arrived. She arrived for her riding lesson, right? So Mona arrived early for her morning for her riding lesson, right? So we can then say she arrived early. She was early. So when did she come? Arrive early. And this is a chat we need to have, right? So eventually or privately, this is a chat that we need to have. So that is adjectives as well as adverbs. All right, let's go to our test, right? And in our test, we need to say if the word is an adjective or if the word is an adverb. Adjective, it tells us about nouns that either tells us what kind of nouns or how many nouns, right? And an adverb tells us about the verb, an adjective, or another adverb. And it either tells us how, when, or where. So is the word in bold an adjective or an adverb? Please lock the door securely when you depart. So securely, we need to say if that word is an adjective or an adverb. All right, so we're going to say this is an adverb, right? It tells us how the door was locked. The lemonade you made from scratch is so refreshing. Is that an adjective or an adverb? Refreshing. The lemonade you made from scratch is refreshing. All right, let's choose an adjective, right? And that is correct because refreshing tells us about the lemonade, right, that we made or that they made. Volunteers generously constructed a new playground in Newport. Is that an adjective or an adverb? Generously. So volunteers generously constructed a new playground in Newport. Generally. Generously. So we're going to say generously is an adverb because they're telling us about the construction or the constructed of the playground. Your final decision was quite reasonable. Is that an adjective or an adverb? Decisions that we made. It's reasonable or is that an adjective or an adverb? All right, let's choose one. We said an adjective, right? Which tells us about the noun. So well done if you have all of those, right? And that is words that is either an adjective, which tells us about the noun, or an adverb that tells us about the verb. All right, so in our chapter on adjective and adverbs, right, we did the lesson on choosing between the adjectives as well as adverbs, as well as is the word an adjective or an adverb, right? And we said an adjective, it is a word that tells us about the noun and it often tells us what kind and how many. And we also said an adverb, it is a word that tells us about the verb, adjective, as well as another adverb. and it usually tells us how, when, or where, right? And we see it most times. Adverbs that tell us how, they usually end in ly, right? So we, within our sentences or within our lessons, we were able to choose between an adjective and an adverb, especially based on the definition thereof, and also identifying them within the different sentences. And we could also identify if it is an adjective or an adverb within a sentence. All right, so that is the lesson so far. In the meantime, can we also go to the aplusclasses.ca page? So we log into aplusclasses.ca. So once you log into the aplusclasses.ca, we're going to learning materials. We go to grade 5, and we're going to language arts. Let's quickly go to language arts practice book. Let's go back. Let's go to grammar practice workbook. Grammar practice workbook. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to adjectives. 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 So then we have fragments. Almost there. Hurry. Almost there. Oh, this adjectives is now very, very far. All right, here we have it. So adjectives and proper adjectives, right? And we say that a word that describes, this is on page, 119. Just said I had to scroll right down. A word that describes persons, places, or things, we say it is an adjective. And an adjective usually answers three questions, right? Either what kind, how many, or which one. In this case, we are mainly focusing on what kind or how many, right? So here it says you need to draw an arrow from each adjective in italics to the noun or the pronoun that it modifies or it tells us about, right? Because remember, an adjective, it either tells us about the noun or it tells us about a pronoun. So we are going to draw an arrow from each adjective to the noun or pronoun that it modifies, right? So the number one says, okay, first an example. The first robots were built in the Middle Ages, right? So first and robot, right? First is the adjective and robots is the noun within that sentence, right? Number one says some early robots can still be seen today. So early, adjective, and robots, right? Which is the noun. In Venice, Italy, two human sized robots dressed in medieval clothing strike the clock tower bell every hour. And here we have human sized as an adjective, and robots is the noun, and medieval explaining the type of clothing. In Germany, Figures dance and play musical instruments. Figures dance and play musical instruments under a church clock. So in Germany, figures dance and play musical instruments under the church clock. Right? So we have musical instruments, church clock. So what kind of clock? A church clock. And although these movements are simple, they are entertaining. So although these movements are simple, they are entertaining. Their movements, sorry. So although their movements are simple, they are entertaining, right? So we need to choose the word that describes or tells us about the noun. So we either have simple movements or there, or it can be entertaining. So simple, right? These robots can get the power from clock parts, right? What parts? Clock parts. And today, robots work on land in outer space or on the ocean floor. So we have outer space, ocean floor, right? And the last one, Japanese scientists are creating a crab-like robot to work underwater. They have Japanese scientists and crab-like robots, right? So that is the adjective as well as the noun or pronoun that we have identified within those sentences, right? And that also links with the lesson that we did today on adjectives and adverbs. So, grade fives, thank you very much for logging in to the lessons for today or to the class today on adjectives and adverbs. I really hope that the lesson was informative. Thank you for being interactive or interacting within the class. Till next time, have a good evening. Goodbye.